I help an old man while camping. What is the unexpected identity of the old man I saved? Grandpa's in trouble. What should I do? There are no doctors way out here in the mountains. The sound of swaying trees and the pleasant babbling of the river could be heard in the depths of the mountains at night. Suddenly, a woman cried out in panic, then burst into tears with a worried expression. I was enjoying my solo camping trip when the voice woke me up. I happened to have a medical license. What, Jack, you're a doctor? I nodded in response to the woman's words as I approached. After saying that, I saw the elderly man clutching his chest, breaking out in a cold sweat and wearing an agonized expression. I was once called a genius cardiac surgeon, but now that I've retired, I felt somewhat guilty claiming the title of doctor. The woman in front of me pleaded. Please save my grandpa. I took a deep breath and made up my mind. Alright, let's pitch the tent around here. My name is Jack, 37 years old. This is a campground deep in the mountains. The first time I came to this campground was back when I was still a practicing physician. At that time, there weren't many campers pitching tents, and it was a quiet place where you could hear the babbling of the river under a sky full of stars. Back then, I was lucky if I could go camping once every 2 months. But now that I've quit being a doctor, I go solo camping every weekend. However, perhaps due to the recent outdoor trend and camping boom, even quiet places have become lively. My favorite campground has been disturbed by families with small children and groups of college students making noise late into the night, making it impossible to quietly lose myself in thought. I find a spot as far away from people as possible, pitch my tent, and take a sip of the coffee I brewed. Ah, this is relaxing. I take a deep breath in the quiet forest. The rich aroma of coffee fills my nasal cavity, and a pleasant sense of peace spreads through me. I close my eyes. In the midst of the fresh green forest, I once thrived as a cardiac surgeon at a university hospital. It may be presumptuous of me to say so, but I think it's fair to say that I was a young doctor who made a name for myself in that world. I worked hard every day, earning the trust of many doctors and patients. But due to certain circumstances, I quit being a doctor and am now unemployed, living off my savings. Although I have various anxieties about how I'll make a living going forward, for now, I have just come here to be healed by nature. Well, I should be able to manage for a while, and I can take my time thinking about the future. Excuse me, as I was dozing off in my tent, someone called out to my tent, a woman's voice. When I poked my head out of the tent, a beautiful woman was standing there. Yes, can I help you? Would it be alright if I pitched my tent next to yours? I turned my gaze to the space beside me. Huh, there's an old man there leaning on a cane. It seems he's waiting for the woman who came to my tent. Of course, that's fine. That's a fine tent you have. Can you pitch it yourselves? Recently, lightweight tents that are easy to assemble have become mainstream, but a rather old type of tent was placed beside the old man. The woman is drenched in sweat, so she must have carried the tent all the way here. I think it must have been quite tough to carry it from the parking lot to here. Actually, I'm not too confident about it. I can put the tent together for you if you'd like. Really? Thank you very much. Also, I'd appreciate it if you could teach me how to start a fire. Understood. Sure, it's no problem at all. Sorry for imposing on you, but you're a lifesaver. When I said that, the old man approached me with a kind smile. Thanks for being so helpful, young man. We came camping, but we're not used to it. No, it's nothing. Don't worry about it. With the two of them watching over me, I skillfully assembled a tent and table set. Grandpa, sit in the chair. Thanks, Emily. The old man sits in the chair I assembled, leaning on his cane. It seems the two of them are grandfather and granddaughter, a duo of grandchild and grandfather. It's an uncommon combination for camping, but there was a warm and comforting air about them. Camping with grandpa, they must be close. I wonder how old this grandpa is. Maybe around the same age as my grandpa. My grandfather passed away last year. He worked as a doctor until the age of 99 and had a grand death at 100. Many people rushed to my grandfather's funeral, and he was looked upon with respect by those around him. You'd think I could be proud of such a grandfather, but in my case, it's different. Grandpa, I made you some tea. Thank you, Emily. Grandpa, it gets cold after the sun sets. Here's a blanket. Thank you, it's warm. If only I had a grandpa and grandchild relationship like this, I think to myself as I watch the heartwarming pair who pitched their tent next to me. As I feel their peaceful atmosphere, I also feel envious of their relationship. I was raised by my grandfather, who was a cardiac surgeon. My father, who was expected by my grandfather to become a doctor, refused and left home, then married soon after I was born, and the three of us lived happily together. But when I was 10, I was taken in by my grandfather to succeed him. Dad, I don't want to. Why do I have to live with Grandpa? Aren't you and Mom coming? Jack, your grandpa is a doctor who saves people's lives. He's an admirable person. You want to be like Grandpa, right? That's why you're going to Grandpa's house to learn various things. I don't want to be a doctor. I absolutely hate it. I'm staying with you and Mom. Jack, listen to what I say. This has already been decided. My father probably felt guilty for not succeeding him. He readily handed me over to my grandfather. I remember locking myself in my room and crying my eyes out the day before going to my grandfather's house, resisting until the very end. On the day I got in the car. Grandpa came to pick me up with puffy eyes and a sullen face. From then on, I was raised under my grandfather's strict guidance. Not only studies but every aspect of my lifestyle was naggingly instructed, and my life up until then completely changed. It's like I'm a hostage. Having realized everything, that's what I thought. Apparently, there was a condition for my father to get permission to leave home. When he got married and had a child in the future, he promised to make that child a doctor. In other words, my future was decided for me before I was even born. But I worked hard to meet my grandfather's expectations, and my grades were always at the top of the class. I was financially well off, so I had no trouble becoming a doctor. Having been separated from my parents early on, maybe I wanted to at least receive my grandfather's affection. But my grandfather never praised me until he died, and our relationship remained cold until the very end. In contrast, the granddaughter in the tent next to me is being thanked just for making tea and putting a blanket on his lap. I fulfilled my grandfather's wishes, but in the end, I was never told, "Thank you," or, "You worked hard." I've been desperately working hard to be acknowledged by Grandpa, but in the end, it lost all meaning. Looking at the close pair, I was reminded of my grandfather and felt an indescribable sense of loss. Well, I think I'll go fishing to get some ingredients for dinner. I grabbed my fishing rod from the tent and cast my line into the river in front of me. Can you still catch brown trout in this river? I hear a voice behind me and turn around to see the old man from the neighboring tent standing with his cane. Yes, you can catch them. Do you come here often? I asked while keeping my line in the water. Oh, I used to come here a lot with my friends when I was a kid. We'd fish and swim with our buddies. This is the first time I've been back since then. The old man answers with a distant nostalgic look in his eyes. That must have been a long time ago. Yeah, I'm nearing the end of my life. When I mentioned the places I want to go and things I want to do while I'm still alive, my granddaughter said she'd make it happened. She's been taking me everywhere, from nearby to all over America. What a kind granddaughter. Impressed, I glance over at the granddaughter who is struggling to make a fire pit by gathering r.cks from the riverbank in front of the tent. Seeing her having a hard time, obviously inexperienced, I can't help but call out to her. I'll make the fire pit later. I brought a barbecue set too, so how about we have dinner together if you'd like? I'll lend you a fishing rod. When I make that suggestion, she happily agrees. Well, we can eat the fish we catch. I'd love to try fishing. The granddaughter smiles as she wipes her sweat. I lend her my spare fishing rod and give her some pointers since it's her first time fishing. Brown trouts are very cautious fish, so make sure your shadow and the rod's shadow don't reflect on the water's surface. Got it? After a while, it seems a fish has taken the bait as the float sinks. Oh, I think a fish is on the hook. The granddaughter exclaims excitedly. Slowly, don't rush. Lift the rod up to your side while keeping it upright. Gradually reel the fish in as it gets closer. I confirm that the fish is near our feet, then grab the line close to the hook with my hand opposite the rod and lift the fish onto land. Amazing, I caught a big one. Look, Grandpa. A large brown trout is hooked, glistening in the sunlight. The old man smiles warmly, his eyes crinkling at his granddaughter's delight. We catch a total of 10 brown trouts and start preparing dinner. What a big catch. This is more than enough for the three of us. I'm so sorry for everything. I know it's late, but what should I call you? As I hand over the rock salt to rub on the brown trout, the granddaughter takes it and looks at me hesitantly. My bad, I hadn't introduced myself yet. My name is Jack. As I bow my head and look up, intending to make contact with the old man, his face looks different from his calm expression earlier. The old man is staring at me, wide-eyed as if he's a different person. What's wrong? I'm Emily, nice to meet you. This is my grandpa, George. As Emily introduces her grandpa, he bows his head slightly while remaining seated in his chair. George. I feel like I've heard that name somewhere before, but I can't recall it right away. Emily, I'll get the fish, so after washing them, pat them dry and rub salt on them. Oh, inside the belly too, okay. Got it? Once we successfully start the fire, we divide the tasks and begin preparing dinner. Getting ready to make their Emily and her grandpa. George brought in setting up the barbecue while Emily chops the vegetables. I prepare to cut bread. Meanwhile, the old man sits in his chair, keeping an eye on how well the brown trout is grilling. You're really used to camping. It's such a huge help that you're being so kind, Jack. I haven't been camping since an elementary school field trip. When I think of camping, curry is the only thing that comes to mind. Emily marvels at the stylish camp meals I make using the skillet and Dutch oven I brought. I spend more time camping than at home. The food I make and eat out here is way tastier than what I make at home. Alright, it's ready. Let's eat. Help yourself, George. I call out to the old man who was watching us work. Gratefully, the old man takes the plate of food. Well, the saltiness of the fish is perfect. It's very delicious. It reminds me of the old days. It's really tasty. The curry Emily made is also very delicious. As the sun sets and we laugh together while eating dinner around the campfire, I think to myself, this feels nostalgic, eating with others and telling each other how good it tastes. When I was with my parents, family meals were a given, but after I was taken in by my grandfather and started living with just the two of us, a helper would come to make meals, and it became my daily routine to eat those meals alone. Even on the rare occasions I ate with my grandfather, I was either taught dining. I thought if I had to have such suffocating meals, I'd rather just eat alone. Eating under the starry sky like this reminds me of when I was a soldier on the battlefield, the old man says, looking up at the night sky. He tells us how he was sent as a soldier to the southern battlefields and spent nights like this in the jungle with a few comrades who survived back then. We were on the brink of life and death and barely made it back to America alive. Compared to that, tonight's meal is incomparably happier. I see. That must have been tough. Come to think of it, my grandfather also said he went to war. I never heard the story directly from my grandfather, but my parents told me he had a past of going to war. We spent a pleasant night getting sentimental over the old man's story and laughing at the tales of his travels all over the country. Jack, thank you for the delicious meal. After finishing the cleanup from dinner, Emily and her grandfather bow their heads to me. I had a great time too. How about joining me for breakfast tomorrow morning as well? When I suggest that, Emily has a surprised reaction and then her eyes light up. Really? You don't mind us joining you again, Grandpa? Let's do that. It's okay, right? Emily peers into her grandfather's face. But is it all right for us to impose that much? I'll brew some delicious coffee in the morning. I'd love for you to join me. Well then, if you insist. And with that, we each retired to our respective tents. The old man's expression definitely changed when I introduced myself. It's kind of bothering me, and the name George sounds vaguely familiar. As I lay in my sleeping bag, thinking back on the old man's behavior, I fell asleep before I knew it. A while after falling asleep, I'm jolted awake by a woman's scream. Grandpa! Grandpa! It seems the scream is coming from the neighboring tent. Startled, I leap out of my own tent and rush over to the one next door. Is everything okay? What's wrong? When I ask worriedly, Emily desperately strings together words to convey the situation. Grandpa started having chest pains and is in agony. What should I do? There are no doctors way out here in the mountains. Emily is just panicking. Although flustered, I try to stay calm and approach the old man to check his condition. I happen to have a medical license. What? Jack, you're a doctor? I nod in response to her question. The old man is clutching his chest and breaking out in a cold sweat. Are you all right, George? When I call out to him, the old man lets out a groan while holding his chest in pain. It hurts. It's agonizing, the old man mutters, clearly suffering. Despite my panic, I stay composed and assess the old man's condition. Could it be a heart attack? Does he have any pre-existing conditions? No, he doesn't. He's always been very healthy. Well then, as first aid, the medicine I have will be effective. It helps improve blood flow to the heart. I have the old man take the aspirin I always carry with me. Let's call an ambulance right away. As I say that, the old man lying down opens his mouth, struggling to breathe. Take me to my hospital. Huh? Your hospital? I'm surprised by the old man's words, but this isn't a situation to ask for details. Emily quickly calls for an ambulance, and after a while, we hear the sound of sirens approaching. The ambulance can't enter the riverbank where we pitched our tents, so paramedics with a stretcher rush to the riverbank. Isn't this man the director of Sunnybrook General Hospital? I'm astonished to hear the paramedics murmur. Hospital director? This old man is a doctor. Emily and I get into the ambulance and head to the hospital. Upon arriving at the emergency center, nurses and doctors immediately start treating him. When he was brought in, the old man was fortunately conscious and able to talk. Emily and I see the old man off as he's taken into the treatment room. In the dimly lit hallway, Emily clasps her hands together as if praying and bends her head. I gently stroke her back with my hand. After a while, she seems to have finally calmed down. I remember now, about your grandfather. At my words, Emily's expression turns to one of surprise. What? You know about my grandpa? Yes, it was a long time ago, though. My grandfather was an excellent physician but was strict and had few friends. That's why I particularly remember Emily's grandfather. My grandfather never showed a smile, even to me, his grandson. But the only time he did was when a man visited from time to time. I greeted that man once. I didn't know his name or what he did at the time, but I remember him asking, "What do you want to be in the future?" And I answered, "A doctor." The kind-looking man who smiled at those words, now that I think about it, that was George. He's quite different from my grandfather, that's what I thought back then. Letters addressed to my grandfather arrived frequently, and on the back of the envelope, George, was written in neat handwriting. And when my grandfather passed away, I remember seeing that old man among the many mourners. It makes sense that your grandfather's demeanor changed when I introduced myself as Jack. He probably heard my name from my grandfather. Emily listens intently to my story, looking a bit lost in thought. Come to think of it, he said he had a colleague he respected and often visited and wrote letters to. He said they were in the same unit during the war and that he owed him his life. I see, so that's how it was. After a while, a nurse comes to call us. The director's condition has stabilized, so you can go in and see him now. Relieved, we enter the treatment room. We're led to where George is lying on the bed, but he's clearly conscious and even smiling as he looks at us. Emily immediately approaches George's side gently. "Grandpa, I'm so glad you're okay." Emily grips her grandfather's hand, her eyes brimming with tears. The nurse also seems relieved, watching with a smile, and after taking his B.L.D. pressure, she quietly bows and leaves. I slowly approach and call out to George. "It was you after all, George. To think I'd be saved by you. You were so small back then." George and Jack gaze at each other. George smiles at Jack with a nostalgic look in his eyes. "Jack, thanks to you, I avoided a serious situation. It looks like I'll be able to spend some more time in this world. I'm truly grateful. But it's curious, isn't it? This time, I was saved by you, the grandson. It's just like that time." George's eyes seem to be looking far away. "Your grandfather and I were sent to the harsh battlefields of the South Pacific. Your grandfather was a medic." George's voice carries a weight that fills the room with silence. "Your grandfather and I got separated from our unit and wandered through the pitch-black jungle for days. I was so thirsty I couldn't stand it and ended up drinking water from a river. Then I got sick to my stomach." George opens his mouth as if recalling the painful experiences of the past and begins to recount those days of hardship. His voice is quiet but it exudes an anguish that cannot be fully expressed. Emily listens while holding George's hand tightly. "If your grandfather hadn't given me the last pill he had at that time, I probably wouldn't have been able to return to America alive." George speaks earnestly, his eyes glistening with tears. His words are imbued with the hope to live and the strength to overcome hardships. "I had no idea that happened. My grandfather never told me such a story. I'm not surprised. He saw so many terrible things that not only his body but also his heart was wounded." I never told Emily either, right Emily? When George says that, Emily nods firmly. "Your grandfather became a doctor after the war ended. If he hadn't told me to become a doctor too, I probably wouldn't have become one. Your grandfather is my savior in every sense of the word." George speaks with a deep sense of gratitude. "However, my grandfather never showed such warmth towards me. He happily told me that his grandson had become a doctor." "But why did you quit? I heard rumors that you had quit being a doctor. Weren't you a promising young cardiac surgeon?" "I guess you could call it burnout and stress. I tried my best to live up to my grandfather's expectations, and when he passed away, it felt like the string in my heart snapped." As Jack says that, George slowly sits up. "Grandpa, you still need to rest." Emily gently places her hand on her grandfather's shoulder, but George stops her. "I became a doctor at a private hospital. But your grandfather became a doctor at a university hospital to treat patients and also to train the next generation. Don't you think you should follow the same path now that your grandfather is gone? This is your starting point." George speaks to Jack with a serious expression. "This is my starting point." Jack couldn't find any more words to follow. Certainly, his grandfather was strict, but he conveyed everything he could to Jack and lived a full life of 100 years. "I'm going to do my best to live to 100 like your grandfather. For another 3 years, you're still young. What will you do if you quit being a doctor, doctor?" Hearing George's words, Jack thought they might as well have been his own grandfather's words. He felt as if the string that had snapped inside him was reconnected. After that, Jack bowed his head to the university hospital where he had worked and was reinstated as a doctor. Now, with his past determination engraved in his heart, he moves around every day thinking of it as a fresh start. The smiles and words of gratitude from his patients become his daily encouragement. Although he can't go camping as frequently as before, he still finds time to go camping occasionally. On his few days off, the tranquility and pure air in nature heal his heart and give him new energy. Moreover, he no longer goes camping alone. He enjoys new adventures in the vast wilderness together with Emily. Jack, do you think this much firewood will be enough for the campfire? It's plenty, thanks Emily. It must have been heavy, right? No, not at all. After going camping together a few times, Emily seems to have completely gotten into it. From starting fires to cooking camp meals, she's now a pro. The time he spends with her also brings him special healing and happiness. Grandpa keeps making a fuss about wanting to come camping with us. It's hard to leave him behind, Emily says with a laugh. Why don't you bring him along? I'd be more than happy to have him. Well then, maybe I'll bring him next time. Emily laughs, looking a bit troubled. George must have had a really good time on the last camping trip. He seems to be feeling young again, reminiscing about the past. Jack wanted to hear more stories about his grandfather that he didn't know from George. However, since George is quite elderly, there isn't much time to properly hear those stories. Hey, look, I caught a big fish. Emily excitedly holds up the fish wriggling on the end of the hook for Jack to see. She's now so skilled at fishing that I have nothing left to teach her. She's even purchased her own fishing rod and prepares everything herself. Amazing, that's a big one. Jack claps his hands and praises her, responding to her joy. He's soothed by Emily's radiant smile. Looking at Emily and George, Jack reflects on his grandfather once more. Maybe my grandpa was just an awkward person. Even if he thinks that way now, his grandfather is no longer in this world, but his grandfather's teachings are definitely ingrained within him. His grandfather's strictness and love have become a big pillar supporting his life now. Grandpa, I'm all right now. Jack tells his grandfather that in his heart, feeling his grandfather's thoughts, teachings, and love strongly remaining in his heart. Jack once again steels his resolve to face the tough battles at work starting tomorrow.